Hello and welcome back to the channel and a short mini series for this one. We're going to look at plot building in the wake of the Dream Team contest and kind of talking about constraints, how you can build better plots or at least more detailed ones, what the benefits of that might be, and kind of ways in which you might want to think about it. I will be upfront with the very first episode, which is me doing it, in that I don't think this is my anywhere near my biggest strength or even a strength. But I do think I'm good at persevering with it and probably explaining why I'm trying to do it. I'm also probably better with certain types of plots than others, so I've enlisted the help of Pithy Dr. G and Tanner Bronson, who are also going to help with a brief tutorial on how they go about doing this. I did do this on a full stream on Twitch a while back, but I wasn't really happy on how it came out. So I want to show you, to start off with, a kind of plot that I made and then passed off to Tanner, actually. This one's based on Bandon or Oregon, and you've got like lots of dune land, big cliffs and things. You've got gorse, you've got pines. These are all obviously placeholder trees. You've got some kind of flatter areas if you think of trails and how that works through its meadows. And you've got kind of the Pacific dunes sort of stuff that's a bit wilder out here. Now you'll notice that it's not like it's inspired by, but it's not too close. And I think that distinction's a really important one to draw from, because if you try and make it too close, you end up just seeing the exact same holes that are already there, and that's really hard to stop yourself from copying them. But if you imagine we had this whole plot completely blank, you would have infinite options. I mean, you still have a ton here, but looking at this land now, slightly filled out with those bits of planting, it becomes a lot easier to kind of start imagining golf holes and going, oh, we could just put a path, or maybe up here, and then you go, well, actually that's a really cool corridor, but I'd need to come back a little bit further. Or you'd look at it and go, well, there's a path 3 sitting right there. And that, when you put the time into developing the plot, a lot of those kind of things are sort of done for you, and it makes it all a lot easier. Like there's an obvious path 3. And then you might go, well, actually now we're going to go for a path 5 down here. And then you start seeing, oh, well, this could be running down here. But if you make a slightly different decision and go, well, actually, if we went for a path 4 to kind of here, say, or here, or do we then go path 3 up this way? This is stuff you'd have never come up with off the top of your head. So if you invest the time in making that plot first, then everything subsequently gets a lot easier. But where do we start? How do we go for realism? How do we marry realism with a video game? And how do you stop just like copying things? So we're going to take a little deep dive. So the first thing we'll do is we'll look at Google Earth a little bit. Now, Google Earth is great for giving you an idea of kind of elevations and how stuff actually looks on the ground, because you can do this from an overhead. But from an overhead, this could all be flat. Whereas, and this is Broadstone, which is down in Bournemouth area. But when we pan down and actually look at it, you can see how much elevation change there is there. So for example, from up the top over here, so 222 feet, you can see that down here, that's kind of above sea level. All the way down to this green is 117. So you've got 100 feet of elevation change from there to there. So that's the size of this ridgeline it plays off. You also get an idea of how they interact with it. So you can see that it enters the ridgeline at the low portion and then kind of works its way up with a clever transitionary path 3. Really cool path 4, and then it's up on the top. And then that ridgeline kind of carries through on the back 9, but it's more actually the high point, and the holes go low around it for variety. Again, like really cool little routing move to add variety to kind of a similar feature. So we might want to consider how we use that. So all I'm doing really with Google Earth, you're trying, the hardest part really is not to copy and paste this plot of land or this routing. You want to pick up on those key features and then use them as inspiration rather than repeating them. So now I'm going to look at a different one with a very similar, so still Heathland, but we're looking at Alwoodley up in Leeds. Now this one, far flatter. So I think there's maybe about 30 feet of elevation change between the first and the second green. Up here, you can see the elevation data is a little less good here. And then you get onto this main paddock and it's all very flat. So kind of more your traditional heathland. What I love about this course though is its routing and the way that it makes the most of this really narrow space. Like it's just so cool to play, particularly where it bottlenecks up here. And then you get a little bit more of a hint of elevation change around here. So on 10 and 11, where it bends around that corner, drops down, and then 11's this par 3 playing back up the other way. So again, what are we really taking from this? Well, kind of like this aspect of it, the flatter portion, so I want to incorporate some of that. I really like the tightness and how much that kind of bred creativity for how Mackenzie routed it. So, for example, the third tee plays across the 16th fairway. You've got parallel par 3s. So I want to say, see if it's 7 and 14 or 8 and 14. 7 and 14, which enable him to get from one side to the other and tuck those two greens next to each other. So some really clever stuff. And they're really good holes as well. The other thing I really like about this course is kind of a typical Heathland thing. Sunningdale kind of does it as well, where you've got 1 and 18 in this little shoot almost, kind of taking, and same here with 2 and 17. Like kind of the clubhouse is there, get away, play around this bit, come back. That's quite fun for me. Now you could look at Sunningdale and other ones, but I kind of just want to stick with those two. So we've taken two things from those. We're going to try and bring them into our plot. So the next little stage I'll go through is basically just looking at pictures of the courses that I'm inspired by. So here's Alwoodley. Kind of, again, you can look at these when planting, but partly it's to give you an idea of land movement. So Alwoodley, as we can see, pretty flat. You've got a lot of heather kind of at that sort of level, but this is that high ridge area. Bunkering's really distinctive, but again, not huge amounts of movement. So this is the middle of that, one of those two par 3s that cross the property. That's that first and second hole. So you can see that's our 30 feet of elevation. So that's the biggest I want that bit to be. Again, some other shots of it. So similar kind of feel. And that's probably the greatest slope on the right edge of the property. That's on the 5th, I think. I'm just looking across. Then we go into Broadstone. Now this is the one with more land movement. So you can see this one benched into a hill. So when I'm looking at the hills, I'll be thinking, could I be putting a green into the back of that? Or just in front, etc. You can see the land movement in front and behind. Like there's quite a lot of elevation change there. Slightly different bunkering, more pines. This is a really good shot for me when I'm looking at plot work because it gives me an idea of broad elevation change. So really pretty steep. That would be that ravine section we'd be looking at, where they can run fairway. So kind of again abrupt elevation change interrupted by bunker. That's the same hole, but from the higher part of the fairway. Then again, that's that really big hill that comes off 3 to 4. This is those two holes. So that's kind of the 100 feet of elevation change or so. Again, just kind of getting an idea of how this all works together. And that's another really useful picture in terms of building a plot. Here's one of those par 3s that plays over the little ravine. So again, I know what I'm working with. So those are the things I'm really picking up on with these, not the planting so much, although that kind of factors in maybe a little bit as to where you put trees, etc., but not as much. This is then looking at, I believe, Parkstone, so rather than Broadstone. Similar area, similar kinds of elevation change, just I find the whole design's a little less interesting, but still a really cool course. And again, similar landforms, movement. Now we move into Hollinwell, another course that I love. This one has extreme land movement in some parts of it, flatter in others, but still that kind of heathland sort of look. But yeah, lots of those. You can see the with this from Hollinwell, you've got the flatter parts and the more extreme elevation changes. Now looking at Moortown, which is in the Alwoodley vibe. So here, much flatter again. So kind of again more of that idea of what we can work with and what we can do with the greens. And then the final ones we come on to a lip hook, which kind of similar sort of vibe, those sweeping movements rather than lots of individual hills. So like Sunningdale I feel has quite a lot of movement in certain areas, some quite big hills. You get some at lip hooks, so you get this big drop back and kind of so there's a short par 3 that overlooks a par 4. They've since redone some of them. But again, really cool holes. And then this Hind Head, which has a really picturesque sort of par 3. So you could use some of them for planting, but mostly these are there just to kind of like going back to the Google Earth stuff. kind of give you a bit more of a real world interpretation of what those look like and what we're trying to achieve. So when we go into the designer, it's then I've got all of that bubbling away in my head, but I'm not really trying to reproduce any of it specifically. Okay, so back in the designer, and we've done the usual thing of taking everything down to 0. You'll see a lot of people do that, of starting the plot with no holes on there, everything like this, and just automatically flattening it themselves. That's because it just stops the autogen fairways flattening everything, which gets like it just limits you so much. So I would always recommend you build courses this way. Now, the first thing we're probably going to do is lower the lighting. The main reason for that is so that you can really start seeing the undulations and land movement that you're working in. Doesn't matter what that is, and we're going to set it to clear. Now, we're not going to see anything at all currently because it's all dead flat. Now, one thing I would recommend is trying to get an idea of like what area you're using first. So it doesn't need to be perfect, but we said we wanted that little shoot in, so we're going to try and recreate that a little bit. Let's go 130 odd. So, and that's enough to get 2 holes should I need it. And then we're going to go out to, I don't know, this sort of an area. So quite a lot, and I'll probably trim it back in at some point. So that's much wider than Allwoodley, but my thinking is we have this kind of little shoot here, then we work our way to, like, I don't know, ridge line going through the middle probably. So almost like you want the flat land here. So I think we're going to have a rise up this way, kind of like Allwoodley does. This is your flat high point-ish. There'll be some land movement around that. And then here's your ridge line and maybe some hills around here, things like that. So you can see we've got a rough idea, but we're not. What we've not done is copied Broadstone. We've not copied Audley, etc. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create that really high land and it dropping off. Now, it strikes me that I may not have raised the whole of the terrain as much as I might have liked, but that's okay. So we can take any types of brushes. It doesn't really matter which, I would say. So we're going to raise this up and go to 30 odd feet there and just see what that's done. So now that's dropping 30 feet, but gently, which is quite nice. So like that hole wouldn't really look uphill too much. And then off the other side, drops down as well. But you want to get those big gradients in at the start. Maybe going to now drop this down a little more. I'll start making some bigger moves here at this point. And now we're going down 45 feet. Okay. So we've got some interest, like the general ridgeline sorted. And what I'll probably try to do with this one as much as I can do is raise rather than lower. Because just thinking about it, I didn't raise the plot more than 50 feet and you don't want to hit water at the bottom. Okay, so now we're on like 68 or so. We've got this as well. Okay, so far so good. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to some trees. We're going to stick with pines because that's kind of what everyone knows Heathland for, but you could use any, it doesn't really matter. What we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste some little tree lines in. So just talk you through this briefly, but the idea is really just to add some kind of, for lack of a better word, something that just frames holes or like fills the gaps. Because at the moment you could feel like you go anywhere, but we want your mind to start filling those in a little bit more. So we're just going to pause briefly and I'll come back when those are all done. Okay, I'm back. Work of about 2 minutes, but we now have everything kind of fleshed out from here. And all of these are placeholders, but they will give us a few things to work on. Now, some of the other things I'll probably look at doing at this stage is just chucking a couple more on the interior. Again, all of this is utterly random. You don't really care. I mean, you can decide to do it, but the key thing is just that you have some things to play off. And you may choose to add, like, I don't know, an interior tree line as well if you wanted. You may recall my Dream Team plot did some similar stuff to this. That's kind of the reasoning for it. It's so that you have a few things to prompt creativity and not just kind of go for the very first option that presents itself. Let's say we'll put some stuff there. Let's have another couple and then we'll move on. The other thing I would probably stress at this point is that I don't anticipate this plot will be particularly great or indeed perfect. It's more to show you the process. And often I end up redoing plots a number of times until I'm really happy with them. So for example, I'm looking at this bit and thinking, actually, is that maybe a bit wide? Do I want kind of that to be how it works? We could also just chuck a road through here just to add a further constraint. So we can do that. And I quite like doing things like that because it can tie the course in a little bit, but it also kind of gives you something to really think about and push for alternatives when you're doing your routing. So the next thing I would do is now look at adding some more minor land movement. It doesn't really matter which order you do this, but all I want is to have a couple more like gentle ups and downs on this part. So we'll mix between highs and lows. The key thing with these kind of heathland courses is that you do have like big slopes, but it doesn't mean that, for example, it would be very boring if we went, well, this has to be the low side, therefore everything slopes this way. You kind of want some ups and downs. And there's lots of different brushes you can use to do that. I would suggest generally the fuzzy brushes. With lots of these, I'm holding X and spinning. And all we're doing is applying some very gentle changes over the land. So as you can see, it's doing some little drops and raises, nothing too crazy, but enough to add some little bits of interest. Now you might decide that actually we want a hill on the inside, say. Let's do that. But all of this is going to mean that when you eventually come to make those golf holes, you've got the land there that means that any of those kind of, so you can see that has, even though these raises have happened off here, they are coming into this. So if this fairway slopes this way, that makes sense with the land around it. Okay. We probably want to flesh out some of those ravines because those are the more interesting parts. And this is definitely the part where I can tend to overdo it. And honestly, there's no real right or wrong answer for how you might want to go about doing this. Basically, take brushes that kind of have the fuzzier edges. If you look at this, for example, we don't really want to use that because you can use it for about 10 inches or so. And even then, you can kind of see where it's impacted on the land. But let's say we did it for anything noticeable and it really starts standing out. So it's up to you which brushes you take. These ones are pretty good for ravines and drops and things like that. So quite a lot of people might use them for coastline. If you're using these ones, try and take them way off the edge and then use them. You can see how that's kind of impacting as well. Maybe we'll raise up a bit more on this side. Now you can see we're starting to get some of those sorts of ravines and things that Broadstone has. So you kind of want to sense check it and go and measure every once in a while. So dropping down 9 feet and then up 20 feet, that's quite a significant difference. So maybe we want to look at those. Don't be afraid to use flatten as you go. Now we might decide on the far side you want a hill. We did talk about this kind of area being a bit more of a feature or a plateau as well. So we could do that. Now at this point, I'm still feeling that this is all a bit too wide. So what we might do is bring in that tree line a little more. And same with some of that. But it could just be that you end up making this course a little wider than you initially planned. And that's okay too. So all we're going to do is just start moving these until you're starting to get the feeling you want. Because now that feels like a really good corridor for one hole. You could fit 2 if you wanted to, but for one hole that'll get a kind of big grand feel. Going back to brushes again, you can really play around with whatever. But let's say we go for this one. We're starting to create some of those mounds. And now if we flip just into the camera mode, you kind of want to browse around this every once in a while and feel, is this too flat? Does this need more? How much space have I got, etc. Now I think at the moment this is all too wide. So we're going to adjust as we go. Take all of this tree line and just move it in a bit. Because we don't really care about any of the actual positions of the trees, we're just trying to use them to get an idea of kind of space and how that all works. And the good thing with all of this is, as you do anything with this stuff, you are making it more random, and therefore you're taking out any pre-planning a little bit more. And you will often see designers talk about course kind of morphing into its own thing, or like it started off as one thing and then it went in a different direction. Like that's where your best stuff will happen, when you go away from those initial things that you originally had. So we'll just do some more of this, and it's up to you. Like for wilder courses, like or links courses where you maybe want more kind of land movement, you'd make this brush smaller, 2 feet now. If you look at those kind of little moguls, they're not particularly abrupt, but that's far more than you would maybe want on this sort of a course. So it's up to you how you choose to generate it. We could also deliberately create specific features, like say I knew I wanted this to be the edge of the ravine. Like, do that. Because at this point, you're not like choosing to put a hole there. You're just creating interesting features. And now looking at this, like that drops down 25 feet and then rises back up again a little bit. Like that's a really cool approach for whatever you choose to do with it. And you could then follow that by going up to this side. You could get more wild and decide to, I don't know, let's go with this brush. So again, just try different things and see what they do. But if you're going with the really fuzzy ones, don't be afraid to make them really big. That will almost seem like it's done nothing. And if you're ever not sure, you can always press undo and you can see the changes that it's made. So that did quite a bit. So anyway, this is far from a completed plot. I would tend to spend a couple of hours probably on it. And what I would later go on and do is start looking at it and digging out little green sites, perhaps, particularly if this is a plot I was passing on to someone else. So like I've done plot swaps with Dan, Matty, Petro before, and RJ Wills. It might be kind of I go in and put in some really good green sites, because when you're handing it off to someone else, they don't know that you specifically created those things. When you're doing it yourself, you might want to kind of steer clear of that, because if you do that, then it ends up kind of guiding your routing a little bit. But for finer detail work, you can choose to do brushes like this. Like, let's say you wanted to put in, I don't know, more of a hog's back. That's lots of single clicks. Hoping you might be able to hear it, but you can do that. You can do it even more sharply if you want to, but you just got to be careful that it doesn't always hold down. So sometimes you might want to flatten as well if you want to do it this way. But it can be really tough to do that. But let's say we wanted that hog's back slope. Well, we can now do stuff like this. That softer brush. Well, now that slope is there, but it's much more subtle, so it's still dropping 2 feet this way, 2 feet that way. And chances are that by the time I came back to it, I'd forgotten that was there. I then might try and make a little hill that ties into. Drop little bits. What I guess the final thing I'd leave you with is then when you're doing this, try and give every area of your plot a decent amount of time. So I might now, you can see I've kind of drawn myself into focusing on this area. I'm not thinking about golf holes. I'm thinking about features and putting that in. And we've put a little hill in there. You've got the trees to work with. You've got this ravine and dip. Like there's interesting stuff there. There's the hill on the other side. And that can really help. So I'd probably spend like half an hour going around here and just adding interesting bits. The other thing you might want to do, I mean, we said it was a heathland course, so I might want to sprinkle some heather. I don't tend to do a ton of planting doing much before I do much else, or pre-rooting, but sometimes it can help, like give you an idea of, particularly if you want, I don't know, say multi-plant, then you get an idea of, oh, there's the heather, and that can again give you ideas of how you might come up with a course or a golf hole. But yeah, that's really it. I think the main thing I would say is before you go in, you want to have an idea in your head, so of what you're trying to accomplish and also the courses that you're trying to riff on. But also, you don't want to create that plot exactly. Otherwise, it gets really hard to go away from exactly what they did. You want to have ideas of key land movements, how much is there, how do those courses accomplish that, and then try and just kind of riff on those features. Have an idea of dimensions, that can help. And yeah, the last bit really for me is don't be afraid to use constraints, because those ultimately really help, rather than just looking at this and going, I could put golf holes anywhere, but like that doesn't really prompt you with ideas in the same way that I was looking at this, even though this land I haven't done anything to. This does much more, because even those trees, I'm thinking, well, I can stick a green right at the base of them, or I could go here, or there could be a tee shot going through. Like, it gives you ideas. Anyway, hopefully that helps, and there'll be another couple coming along shortly that will explain probably similar things in slightly different words. Hope you enjoy.